Good morning. My name is Dr. Thomas Zobek, and I am on the Non-Professional Players Committee. And this is the second session that I'm doing. The other one was on self-directed return to trumpet playing. And the logical one that follows that is this session, which is playing in a community band or orchestra or chamber ensemble. And the reason why I say that's a logical transition is when you're coming back from the trumpet, obviously, initially you're going to be doing a lot of work yourself. You might not be ready to play in front of people. You might have a fear of playing in front of people. But as I said in the last video, the best thing to get over that fear is to go find a place to play. And often the best way to start is playing in a group, playing in a community band or something along those lines, where you're with a bunch of like people who have similar interests, who are there often for the same reasons, who may or may not be at your skill level. They may be a little better, they may be a little worse, but they're people from whom you can learn and with whom you can develop a relationship, with whom you might forge an opportunity to have like a trumpet buddy, and even maybe small groups as you move on through that. So community bands are really a nice place to start. Before I get into some of the resources that I'm going to show you, I just want to go through some realities about the different levels of community bands. So depending on the amount of time you have, your commitment, how hard your work schedule is, or things like that, you might not have the wherewithal to really make a full commitment to a year-round community band or what we say a school year-round community band. Many community bands, because they use school facilities, are only operating from about September through June, and they might conclude early July or something like that. But many community bands take the summer off. Those would be your more full commitment bands as opposed to summer bands, which might be a good place to start. So if you're just starting and just coming back, I would say one of the best opportunities that you can have that's low commitment in terms of overall time, but does get your feet wet, are seasonal bands. And seasonal bands in my area, and I live in Connecticut, but this is often the case around the country, seasonal bands in the United States crop up sometime at the beginning of June, maybe late May. And usually the goal of the community band, these seasonal bands, is to prepare a number of works, usually of a patriotic kind of base, in order to play during the summer at pavilions, at fireworks, and so forth. And these bands usually only operate July, maybe into the very beginning of August, and they're done. And the reason why that's a really nice opportunity is, first of all, it's local. So you might meet people in your own town or nearby who play an instrument, play a trumpet, for example, with whom you can forge a relationship. These bands are very low commitment because they're only really preparing a very limited number of pieces for a particular purpose. That is for a concert, usually accompanying fireworks or something like that. And it might be a parade that they are in or something along those lines. And the bands, are not a huge commitment during the remainder of the work year. So that these bands really, as I said, fold up at the end of August. But it's something that you could, begin to get your feet wet. It's a very low grade in terms of fear opportunity. You're going to be playing in front of large crowds. Many of the people are probably not going to be paying attention because, as I said, this is going to be during a summer kind of thing where people are having picnics or, getting ready to watch the fireworks or so forth. And the pieces that you're going to play are likely to be very familiar, things like Sousa marches and whatnot. Where again, there's a different level of difficulty depending on the part that you play. Now, the next grade up from that in terms of commitment and time, I would say would be the recreational community band, which usually meets or starts meeting sometime at the end of August or early September, depending on the school year, and continues to meet likely through June, usually until school is out, perhaps even maybe doing some kind of culminating concert in July, in early July, corresponding to, Independence Day in the United States or something like that. These bands usually meet once a week. Rehearsals can be anywhere from, an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on the band, but it is once a week. I know that around here, it's usually about an hour and a half. But they can be longer, it can be 2 hours, it can be 3 hours, depending on the group's mission and what they're out to accomplish and so forth. So there are sort of a gradation of commitment in these community bands. People are in community bands, and I spoke with people who I play with. I spoke with some of the directors and conductors of some of the bands around and about where I am to sort of get a feel for what I wanted to say and how, that reflected the reality. And what I found is that people usually go to the bands for a number of reasons. Some people just go for the opportunity to play. I mean, you've done a lot of practicing on your own in your house. You want to go do something. So you go out and play in a band. Some of them are trying to find friends, especially if you move to a community. A community band is a great way to meet people who at least have, one like interest, which is the playing of music. Um, and you can also, as I said, find a trumpet buddy or something like that with whom you could then work outside of the band. Some people are in the band to learn, so that they've only done the repertoire they've done on their own, and playing in a community band gives you an opportunity to play with other people, play in a different group or a section, which has its own kind of demands, in terms of learning articulations and playing with other people, supporting the lead player, stuff like that. So some people are there to learn those kinds of skills. And then finally, some people are there because they're really good, perhaps, but they either don't have the opportunity in terms of time to play in a semi-pro or professional band, or don't have the desire to do that. And so they end up playing in a community band. You'll find that many people who play in community bands are music teachers. So, and I know that at least one of the bands I play in, I can think of at least 6 or 7 people right away whose job it is to teach music in public schools to students. So they do this as sort of an out because they're playing, I don't know, Mary Had a Little Lamb all day long, and you need something to keep yourself sane. And so the community band gives them an opportunity to do that. And these are great people from whom you can learn a lot of things, because these people have been trained in a variety of different music techniques and so forth. And it really does give you an opportunity to learn. So those are the real reasons why people are there. And the bottom reason to go is really to have fun. I mean, if you're going to the community band and you're not having fun for whatever reason, then you should either find another band or rethink, is this something I really want to do? Because if you're not having fun, you're not getting paid to be there. And if you're not having fun being there, why be there at all? There are also community orchestras. These are usually, again, and by community, what I'm saying here is really these are non-audition, non-paid groups. These are recreational groups. So there are sometimes community orchestras where would be a more of a limited opportunity for trumpet players. Maybe they would take 3 or 4 trumpets and you'd be playing in a much more orchestral kind of environment. There aren't as many of these, but they are out there. And there are also community jazz orchestras. So I play in basically a community band that really is just a jazz group. We just play jazz music. So, and then we play everything from big band to more of a 1950s style kind of music and whatnot. And there's a lot of variety, and we go all the way up to things like Mangione. So I mean, it's a lot of mixed jazz kind of stuff, and those opportunities are out there too. Now, after that, when I talk about the community orchestras, one of the differences with those is that frequently community orchestras are at the next level. So by the next level, I mean, these are audition groups. So in your state, if you're in the United States or your city, I mean, I'm not sure, as I don't live in other countries, what the categories work or how this works, but I imagine it's probably very similar. There are groups, often community orchestras, and as well as things that either call themselves symphonic bands or symphonic winds. These kind of groups are audition groups. And while they are still unpaid, and while they still are at some level community groups, because they're not professional groups, they're not paid groups, whatever, this is still a voluntary commitment. They are trying to up the ante in terms of the difficulty of the pieces that are playing and in terms of the skills of the musicians that they have. So I play, for example, in the Connecticut Symphonic Winds. We have 10 chairs for trumpets because we're a fairly big group. And when those 10 chairs are filled, they're filled. I mean, that's it. There is not an opportunity to play as long as those chairs are filled. And once you get in the band also, you're not necessarily stuck in one place. So as people come and go, you have an opportunity to audition for other chairs, but it really is an audition-based group. So you have to demonstrate a certain level of competence, a certain level of expertise in your playing. And in general, these are groups for people who really are pretty serious about rehearsing, practicing, really improving their game, upping their own antes. So if you really want to work, you're really looking to become proficient, maybe your end goal, and I talked about in the other video about what is your goal as a player. If your goal as a player is really to improve and really to become very proficient and even perhaps, enter the semi-professional thing or begin to get paid gigs, an auditioned community group, symphonic winds, symphonic band, community orchestra, those are probably things that you'd be wanting to shoot for, because you're there with players, many of whom also play in semi-professional groups, some of whom regularly gig for money. These are people from whom you can learn a great deal. As I said, the idea that it is an audition group means that, you have the opportunity to improve your playing and to rise in seats. So, when I joined the Symphonic Winds, I started at third, obviously, and fourth. Some of those pieces have fourth parts as well. And then I had an opportunity to move to second, which was wonderful. And then I had an opportunity to play upholding the principal. And then finally, I actually had an opportunity to play principal. Um, but it's a lot of work, and you really have to have that passion to want to put in the time to work on pieces and to work on audition pieces outside of the regular repertoire that you're working on in rehearsal. And one can, imagine also that the repertoire you're working on is going to be more demanding. The pieces are going to be harder. They're going to be rangier. They're going to be more technical things and ornamentation and whatnot. That's going to require a certain amount of work. So if you have the time to make that commitment and the passion, I encourage you to go do that. That's fabulous. But it is a lot of work. And then finally, when you get past the community groups, you get into semi-professional groups. These are usually smaller groups. They're not usually quite as large, at least not where I am. They tend to be, groups that maybe you have 20 or so people in them. And these are groups into which, one auditions as well, obviously. Fairly often, people know people who know people or whatever, and you hear about through the grapevine that they're looking for someone. Sometimes it might be advertised. Sometimes people might actually come to the audition groups and let people know, oh, such and such a band is looking for a blah. Um, and these obviously are a whole different level of commitment because you are going to be paid. So the level of expertise and the level of excellence and accuracy obviously become that much more important. And then finally, just two other like side things that you can look to. One is when you join a group, obviously if you're community group, what it does is it immediately puts you in contact with a number of other people, all of whom might be interested in playing. And one of the things that you can do as you meet people and as you become friendly with people and find people of a like, interest, ability level, what have you, is float the idea of, either forming a quartet or a quintet or an octet, depending on what it is that you want to do. So when I started playing very early on, I had the opportunity to join a group, which the total number of players had not really been decided, but about, I guess, 8 or 10 of us got together initially to start playing on weekends at the church of one of the members who was actually a French horn player. And then gradually that number sort of whittled down as people found that they either didn't have the time that they could commit to the group, or they decided that performing in a group that small was a little too exposed for them and they weren't ready to do that. And so gradually the group actually did sort of settle down to a quintet. And that quintet I played with that quintet for about 10 years. And it was in a variety of different forms, and that was a lot of fun, and it allowed me an opportunity to grow as a player because I started really, not really in a place where I was playing very complicated music. I mean, we were playing really basic arrangements of things, basic Canadian brass kind of arrangements for like the easy players and so forth. And as time went on and the more I rehearsed, the better I got, the more rigorous the material that we played. And it was really fun because it allowed me to grow as a player, and it allowed me again to get over that player anxiety, which I know is something that everyone faces. The idea that performing in front of a group can be very challenging and terrifying. And as I said in the other video, and as I'll say again here, the only way to get over that fear is to perform as much as possible and in many different venues as possible in front of as many people as possible. Because the more you do it, the more confident you get, and the more you overcome that fear. And the reality is not every performance is going to be great. I mean, the greatest performers out there make mistakes. I mean, yeah, Phil Smith will every so often chip a note. You have to listen for a long time before you hear him chip a note, but he's going to. We all are going to have a mistake here or there, and that's fine. And getting past that, what you got to remember is that the people aren't going to remember the chip. They're going to remember the piece as a whole, and most of the mistakes we make, they're not even going to hear. So that's part of it. So what I want to do right now is share my screen um, and just make you aware of, like, one of the questions that people might have is, well, how do I go about finding a band? And you'd be surprised that it's a lot easier to find bands than you would imagine. First of all, you might just type in your own community's names and just type in your town name and say bands in or bands near. And frequently that will give you. So if I type in the name of my community right away, the thing that comes up is the town in which I live during community band, which is a summer band. And ironically, I didn't know about that band. I actually found out about that band because the guy who is the president of the band was the trombone in the quintet that I mentioned I played in. And that's how I found out. I didn't even know they were there, but you can find out just on the internet. Now, there are a number of sites that I found. I just went really quickly and roughly through the area where I live because I'm most familiar with this, but I'm sure that, if you did a search in your area, you would find a lot of resources as well. I mean, there are going to be places that you might live where you're not going to have the number of bands. Like I'm imagining if you live in the middle of Wyoming, your opportunities are probably going to be more limited simply because there aren't that many people in Wyoming. Or you might have to travel a greater distance. If you're not in a city, if you live in a community, or if you live in a state where people are more widely dispersed, but I'm sure there are going to be opportunities somewhere. So the first site I found that's really kind of useful for some is this Association of Concert Bands. This is actually a site that you would have to the band that you were looking for would have to join this site, but it does give you a band directory, and I'm hoping that it's growing. But all you do is you type in here, you type in find a band. You can say it's searchable. So let's say I go in here. Let's say I'm going to search for I don't know. Let's look for bands in Florida. Okay, so we just type in Florida here. We type in search. And it gives you a whole bunch of bands. It gives you the conductors, it gives you Facebook pages, contact information, and so forth. Some bands do have dues, you'll notice here. So this particular band, the Nassau Community Band in Florida, has $140 per year dues. That's something you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to do. There are community bands that are free. So I play in the audition group I play in is actually not a band that has dues. They encourage donations, but there are no dues. However, one of the community band I play in, one of them is a band that has dues, and those dues go for paying for music, for paying for the conductor, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, you do have these kinds of things, and you would have to make a decision as to whether or not you would be willing to pay dues. But in any case, these are great things, and you can get a feeling for the band. Sometimes if they have a Facebook page, it gives you an idea of maybe the repertoire they play. So you wouldn't waste your time going to, sit in on a band that doesn't play what you want to play. So on, you could get in touch with people, as it says, you give contact information here that's useful. One of the things I think that's hardest for people who are looking for community bands or opportunities to play is just getting yourself into the car, driving to the rehearsal and going, because obviously it's kind of intimidating. You're going to go to this community band, you don't know anybody there, you don't know where you're going to be placed, et cetera, et cetera. I found that really you just have to dive in. The directors usually are happy to see you because again, they never know who's going to show up. They don't know who's going to be with the band from year to year. Usually there's a core group, but oftentimes people come and go. So, I mean, they're always looking for new players. They will usually, in many cases, ask you, either there'll be a section leader that will ask you, more often a section leader will ask you than the actual director or conductor. The directors and conductors of community bands often try not to get so involved in where you sit in a particular section. So frequently there are section leaders who will just ask you, what's your background? What do you think you feel comfortable playing? Do you just want to start off playing at third to get a feel for what we sound like, what we do? Do you want to have a shot at playing second or first? So you kind of have an opportunity to sort of get your feet wet that way. Sometimes the people will then or the section leader will then help place you with also your input about where you feel comfortable. There might be a need for a particular section for particular, like let's say I have a trumpet section. I have a lot of people who are just showing up who want to play third. I have a couple of real hot shots who want to play first, but I don't have anyone playing second. So maybe they'd want to put you in there and give you a shot there. It's going to vary. But anyway, so this is a resource. And again, if you type in, and as I said, this unfortunately, this is a site where the band actually has to have joined it. So you're not going to find a lot of things here, but this would be a place to start because there are connections and resources and whatnot to other sites. Another thing now in Connecticut, which is where I live, sometimes you have musicians who take it upon themselves to help all the other musicians. So in this case, I don't know Kim Collins or whether that is a man or a woman, because I know guys that are named Kim as well. But in any case, this individual who's a flautist has taken it upon him, herself, I don't know, pronoun, to make a listing of these bands. And again, here you have all of these. These are all community bands. You have the website there. In some cases, you have the director. So, and you have a Facebook page. So I'm very familiar with this band. I don't play with them, but I know about them. This is the Connecticut Symphonic Winds, which is a group that I play with. This is the jazz group I play with, the Stratford Community Band. Ironically, Wayne Hiller was my high school band director. Um, and this is another band that I play with here. So, I mean, all of these are great resources. You check on the band site, usually what the band site will give you. So if I check on Westport, which is a band that I play with, right away, it gives you some information. Obviously now, unfortunately, all the bands have not been able to play live because of COVID, but there are activities going on. Usually there are videos, there's a calendar, like when do we rehearse? Okay, when we rehearse, it'll give you holidays. How do you go to join the band? It'll give you some contact information about, the band. You'll find out something about what does the band do? Where does the band play? Does the band do concerts at the end of the year? Blah, blah, blah. So those are all, really useful things. And again, I would always, advise getting a feel for the band that you're going to before you go. Like, see what kind of music it's going to play. Because, if you look at the band and you realize, oh, I don't really want to play that kind of stuff, or like if it's an all jazz band and you really don't want to play jazz, that's probably something that you could find out beforehand, and it would spare you the trouble of having to go. I upload, this is another site very similar in Pennsylvania. And again, look at this. This is a huge list of bands. Now, in this case, there are not web links. So you would probably then have to look these bands up on site if you live in Pennsylvania, but look at the number of bands you have. Now, I don't know, just from this particular list, you wouldn't be able to tell which of these are audition groups, which of these are just recreational groups. So you would have to isolate. So like if I lived in Pittsburgh, I might, investigate all of these different groups and find out, well, which one of these would present an opportunity for me. I would imagine that South Hills Junior Orchestra would probably not be for adults. So, be aware that there are going to be some groups that you'll hit that will be youth symphonies or youth orchestras, obviously, that were designed for more of a student audience. But again, look at the resources that you've got. And this sort of would give you a place to start. You could then go from there. Similarly, Massachusetts, this is the music educators site, Massachusetts Music Educators. You might start here. If you're not finding any other resource online, you might actually look for your state's music educator site. Every state will have one. And that may be a resource place for you to start. People who are connected with this will likely know about bands. As I said, often community bands have as members frequently people playing the first chairs, or at least the first parts, are frequently music educators who are working in the public school districts, and they would be good resources. They would be people who would know the bands because they're playing in them. But again, here you have also choirs, orchestras and bands. And we'll click on the Chelmsford Community Band, and it's redirecting me. I didn't know it was going to do that. Okay, my connection is not private, so I'm not going to follow that up. But I mean, you may go to a number of these bands. I'm not sure how many of these actually have privates. I'm not sure how the Massachusetts sites work. So here you go. So the Maynard Community Band, there you go. Clearly, this is a community group. Looks to me like it probably would be, a regular. It's very much like the Westport Band. So they have a mission statement, which is probably just, we want to, outlet for things, public performances, blah, 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 and whatnot. So, I mean, all of these are going to be very similar, and joining the band again, they'll give you contact information probably about where to go, who to call. There's no audition, it says here. There are no membership dues. Some of them do require uniforms. So notice this one says you have to purchase a band shirt. They have a particular uniform they use when they perform. That's very typical, that for some of these community bands, you will have to buy like a shirt or a coat or jacket or something like that. Again, as I said before, with anything involving music, there's going to be an investment, whether you're buying music for yourself or rehearsal or whatever, or whether you're actually buying things to participate in the group. What you'll notice about this group is that all ages are represented. Yes, there might be a tilt toward the more senior age group. That's not untypical. But if you look through here, you're going to see that there are obviously some younger people. There might be a high school kid here and there, we don't know, or people who are in college. There are clearly some younger people. So don't be threatened by, oh, everyone there is going to be, whatever. I mean, bands are going to be varied, and age really doesn't matter. We're all there to play our instruments and have a good time. So, that's the way it is. Um, Going on, just to give us a few more examples, I found this was a useful site in New Jersey. Again, huge list of groups. Uh, this one again is really helpful because on the actual website for New Jersey, this one's really efficiently done. They give you the performance types. So if they do concerts or parades, they give you the web and email address. They give you phone numbers where applicable. They tell you what day of the week they rehearse, the time they rehearse, the season during which they're operating, and even where they rehearse. So that's really fabulous because you can get an idea right up front of the commitment that you would have and the kind of performance opportunities that you would have as well. One of the unfortunate things about all of this, at least I find it so because I love playing in bands, is you're going to have to make some decisions because many bands, there are going to be a good number of bands out there that you might have to choose from, but they may rehearse on the same evening. And very rarely will bands be happy if you're only coming in every other rehearsal, unless you are really, at a skill level that they need. And even then, they're not going to be that happy because part of being in the band is the camaraderie. The weekly attendance is really important. It's hard for other people in your section to know what the section's really going to sound like if people aren't there regularly, especially if the lead player isn't there. So that's often the case. I am in one of the bands I play in where I do not go as often because I have actually school commitments. In that particular case, the director understands, so that, directors will, if you have commitments in the evening, that will sometimes interrupt your schedule. They're usually very good about doing that. Some bands threaten attendance policies. I mean, in the scheme of things in my life, I've never seen anyone be thrown out for a lack of attendance. I have seen people in the audition group demoted from chairs for lack of attendance, not in the group I play in now, but in another group. So, they expect you to be there. I mean, it is a commitment like any other kind of commitment. So this is a really good a good resource if you're in New Jersey. Another huge one here for New York. Um, and again, they give you descriptions. This is kind of fun because they sort of give you pictures of all these things, but it gives you an idea right away of some bands. So so this is a resource, and I will send this on as well. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit also about responsibilities when you're in a group, and the emotional component. I spoke with the directors of a number of different groups, some that I play with and some that I don't, about how they perceive, like what is the director or conductor's idea or perception of the players and the group, and what are their concerns. And there are a couple interesting things that were apparent right away. One of them is that for the most part, most of the conductors and directors agreed that people who play in the bands are really happy playing in the bands. They're usually there for reasons involving, just wanting to play, wanting to have the fun of playing and whatnot. And so egos were not always that big a thing. And more often the case, people were, fairly happy and mellow about what they were doing. But every so often there were issues about players who were chomping at the bit to play a bigger part or thought they were better than they were. And these are delicate situations. And what I would say, and lead players also told me, because I said to them, well, what do you do when you have a player who is particularly itchy to play a part that might be beyond their capability? How do you negotiate that? And it's hard um, because obviously you want to retain players and you don't want to put people off. At the same time, you want to give people opportunities to grow. So if somebody's really working hard and really improving their game, you know, they may not want to stay at fourth or third trumpet their whole lives. They may want to have opportunities to move up. What I was told for the most part by the conductors and directors of the pure community bands, so the bands that are not audition bands, just the recreational bands, is that what they try to do is if a player feels particularly, unchallenged, their advice has always been to, start the conversation with the section leader saying, look, I'm playing third trumpet, but I really would love opportunities to do something more challenging because, I'd like to grow more in my playing, and I'm rehearsing and whatnot. And usually those section leaders will either work with you, or will go with you to talk to the conductor. Now the conductors in many cases try to choose pieces that are going to have juicy bits and challenging bits and interesting parts for everyone. So that was something that all the conductors assured me, is that when they're looking for pieces, they're not looking for pieces that are going to be uniform in terms of difficulty for every section, every way the same way. So there are going to be times where the third players are going to have the lead melody, or there are going to be times where the first players are just going to be doing some sort of background thing or whatever. So they're trying to find pieces that are going to be more challenging for the group as a whole, which of course is challenging, but it's something that conductors are aware of. But I would say, and I was told that if you find that you really are working hard and you want an opportunity to do something that's maybe a little bit beyond what you've been asked to do up to now, tell people. And that those opportunities are available, and you will be given those chances. And one of the things that comes up is frequently, community bands are often asked to do smaller, sort of small concerts where not the entire band does the concert. So there are breakout groups. For example, there might be a concert that the local library may want you to do a concert for a holiday or a celebration or what have you, and they don't need everyone to go because they simply don't have room for 80 people. So they might, in that particular case, um, they might just have a smaller breakout group come, and that would give you an opportunity to play in a smaller group, and may also give you an opportunity to play, a more difficult part. So that's always something to look out for, those kinds of opportunities. Um, One of the other things that really is important to remember is that it is a commitment when you're joining a community band. So the expectation of the other, the section leader, if you have one, certainly of the conductor, is that, you're going to be working with the music. You're going to be practicing on your own. You're going to be learning some of the more difficult parts on your own, because they really don't have the opportunity or the time to rehearse in a sectional way. They might go over a particular part with a section during a rehearsal, but rehearsals are not sectionals. And so it's important for you as a band member to know that you have a responsibility to yourself and to your fellow players and to the conductor to do the work that you need to do to be competent and to play accurately, because that really is part of it. I mean, you don't want to end up sounding poorly, and you don't want to pull down your section. Um, if you are doing the more audition-based groups, um, the expectations are, I would say, even more overt, because you are or have auditioned for and won a particular chair, and the expectations that come along with winning that chair are a given. So if you are not able to put in the time you need to really do the job that needs to be done at that particular level, you probably shouldn't audition for the chair. And the problem is, frequently you have people who audition for the chairs because they think, well, I'm good, I can do that, blah, 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 blah. And they probably could, but then they're unwilling to actually do the work that comes along with winning those chairs, and that's clearly an issue. And finally, looking at other opportunities with regard to like community orchestras and smaller groups and whatnot. The community orchestra actually is going to be a lot like what I just talked about with the audition groups. With the groups that you found yourself, I mean, those really are things where it comes from the people in the group. Um, with the quintet that I was involved in, it was frequently difficult for us to find common time to rehearse. But those groups should be easy. If you find that it's a lot of work, that may not be something you want to get involved with. I mean, usually quintet and quartet groups, you're playing with people with whom you enjoy spending time, who often play at a similar level than you. And I say that because I know that we were in the particular group I was playing in, at one point we were stuck for a second trumpet player, and we found one. But the particular individual, while being a very friendly soul and all the rest of that, really just couldn't put in the time that was necessary to learn the pieces. So it really became problematic and frustrating for the other members of the group, because we really couldn't do what we wanted to do. So I would say that when you're forming a quartet or a quintet, if you're if that's something you want to do, you really do have to think in terms of, well, what is the level of music that you hope to play? Where are you now? Where might you hope to be? Because some quintet and quartet groups are perfectly happy, playing the same level of music forever because they're just doing it for fun or whatever. But sometimes you'll get people in a quartet or a quintet who are more hungry, who want to play more challenging pieces, who want to play more maybe legit in their eyes pieces of music. And so it's important to know right at the start, is everyone else in the group committed to growing as a player and putting in the time necessary to make those jumps in terms of accuracy and skills and so on. And if not everyone is, what you're going to do is get into a situation where you're going to be really frustrated because you're going to be playing with people who, in your mind, aren't good enough or aren't skilled enough or whatever, or you're going to feel like you're being held back. And that's really not going to go very well. So, I mean, as with everything else, I think it's always important to think about goals. And with groups, if you're going to be in a quartet or a quintet or you're trying to form one, I think what right off the bat, you have to have a discussion with the other players about, well, what are our goals? Where do we want to be? How good do we want to get? And how much do we want to play? The group that I played with, was the quintessential old folk home kind of quintet in that we played, the whole assisted living old folk home circuit, if there is such a thing. And I don't mean to be offensive in that, but that's just, that's the reality, is that we were playing mostly for senior centers and what have you, which was fun. I mean, and I think it's a valuable thing, honestly. Sometimes we would go to these places and people would just come to life because they would hear the music, and it really is giving back on a level that's really in and of itself a really satisfying thing to do, because you really are bringing joy and a different thing into lives of people for whom life might be, not terribly interesting a good part of the time. So it's really rewarding. It's really a great form of community service in addition to everything else. But you have to ask yourself, how much time do I have in my schedule to do that? Do I want to spend a lot of weekends rehearsing or going to these different places or what have you? How far am I willing to drive? There are a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself. So, right up front, you really need to start thinking about, what is my level of commitment in many different kinds of levels. So that kind of wraps up the majority of what I wanted to say. And I hope that some of this has been helpful. Just to recap the big elements, again, playing in a community group or any other group where you're playing in front of the public is a huge, wonderful, valuable opportunity for all players. It will help you with your technique, with your form, with your playing. It'll also help you get over playing anxiety because you'll be playing with a whole bunch of other people, and that's a wonderful thing. It'll get you out there. It'll get you meeting people, making friends, hopefully finding a trumpet buddy or what have you. All of that's a great thing. It also gives you an opportunity to give back to the community in those concerts, as I mentioned, especially in the small groups. If you're playing for senior centers or people who are, not able to get out and see concerts, people to whom you can then bring the concert. Wonderful thing. Um, Questions you need to ask yourself right up front, how deeply do I want to get involved in this? How much time do I really have? How much time do I have not only to go to rehearsals, but to rehearse on my own to learn the pieces? How committed am I to improving my own playing to maybe, become second or first or principal? Is that something I'm interested in doing? So all of those kinds of things, super important to think about beforehand, so you can kind of get a gauge before you join a band. What kind of music am I interested in playing? How many hours do I want to play? Do I really want to sit through a 3-hour rehearsal after being at work all day long if I'm, still in the workforce? Ugh, maybe not. So really go in, eyes fully open, and don't be afraid. I mean, they're going to be happy to see you. Um, when you go to a band the first time, you have an option. You could either go without an instrument and just listen, and people certainly do that. That's happened in many times where I've been in rehearsals where new people have come along and they just come in to listen. Sometimes they decide that they want to come in and play the next time and join the band. Sometimes they decide it's not for them because they feel like they're intimidated by the music. Um, if you feel like if you do feel that, one other thing here, if you go to a rehearsal for a community band and you feel intimidated by the music, I think before you give up, I think an opportunity there is to just speak briefly with the conductor, the director, and say, well, gee, the music seems really hard and whatever. And they might say, well, yeah, I mean, it might sound that in toto when everyone's playing, but that some of the pieces are not as challenging, and maybe you should give it a shot. Um, So, don't be intimidated by the music. I think most often I mean, unless you want to go without an instrument, sometimes it's more fun to just go with an instrument the first time around and just get a feel for, how you sound with everybody else, and be more participatory, because you might get more out of that than just being a spectator. But, that's your call. Um, and you know, remember that the reason you're there is to have fun. And I think that's the crucial thing. I've played in bands where clearly people were not having fun, and they kind of bring it down for everybody when they do that, because people start criticizing other people and whatnot. And there is this emotional component. I mean, as a principal player or a first trumpet player, there are opportunities that you have where sometimes people are doing something consistently wrong, and I think there are ways that you can help people, or remind them of doing something they're doing in a way that's very non-threatening. There are ways that you can do it that are a lot more threatening, or perhaps even aggressive in the eyes of other people. So I'd say one of the things that's probably the biggest minefield in all of these groups is when you're playing with somebody who isn't playing correctly. What do you do, and how can you help them to play correctly without offending them or making them angry or what have you? I have the good fortune of playing in a group where our principal is always very helpful, is never very threatening. And I know that there are people in the section who, when he just points things out to them, get super offended just because he's pointing them out to them. And I think that that's not his intent. And I would say that the majority of the time, overwhelmingly so, if a principal player or if a player who's in another seat or what have you offers some advice, they're trying to do it in a kind way. I mean, I don't think they're calling you out and saying you suck. They're really saying, look, you're missing this accidental consistently. You might want to just mark that in your music, or um, just remember, the dynamic here. We're supposed to get softer, so try that, or don't end the passage by going bah, which frequently people do. But I think all of this, there's a way to say it nicely, and there's a way not to say it nicely. If you're not sure, you might want to just go to a section leader and say, the person playing next to me is having a lot of trouble with this passage, and then the section leader, can maybe find a way, because usually people who are uh, put in that role in many bands are put in that role because they are good at telling people things that in some cases the people might not be very fond or willing to hear. Um, but as a rule, I would say, as a rule, just enjoy yourself and don't worry about somebody flubs a note every so often. It's a community band. You're not getting paid. You're not supposed to be professionals. You play the best that you can, but you're there to have fun. Um, Sharing my screen just quickly at the last little bit here. I just want to show you, this is if you looking for websites, or you have any questions about anything that's been raised here or whatever, that is my contact information. And I want to also draw your attention to some of these other hyperlinks that are super useful for non-professional players. One is the non-professional player page. On that, you'll find a lot of useful resources and information for particularly non-professional players, or comeback players, as sometimes also non-pros are called. And also you can sign up for the non-professional quarterly email, which will apprise you of opportunities to play, things that are upcoming with the ITG, and what have you, and also opportunities to actually write articles that would be potentially published in the journal. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful for you. At very least, I hope that it spurs some thinking for those of you out there who might not be playing in a community group, or who are thinking maybe of trying to break out of a community group and create a quartet or a quintet or something along those lines. Just food for thought. That's really what this is, and a couple of internet resources. As I said, I just gave you the ones for the states around me, but if you type in community band near me, the likelihood is that a list will come up, or you might say community orchestra near me, or a jazz orchestra near me, what have you. Or, as I said, the State Music Educators Association sites may also be good resources, because they may have links to community bands, or you could actually call them and they may know people who play in community bands amongst their own faculty, who will be able to help you find a band. But in any case, I again wish you luck with your journey as a player in whatever kind of group that you find yourself in. And I hope that you have a great deal of fun doing all that, because that's why we do it. Thanks.